Greetings from First United Methodist Church of Los Alamos, New Mexico. We hope this message will be meaningful and relevant to your life and your relationship with God. We invite you to join us for worship on Sunday mornings. We have now resumed in-person worship with one service at 10 a.m., which is live streamed both on Facebook and on YouTube. We alternate each week between contemporary and traditional music. You may confirm worship times and receive more information by visiting our website, firstinyourheart.org. Now may you be blessed through the reading and hearing of God's holy word.
Our first scripture reading comes from the 18th chapter of Matthew. The disciples ask Jesus who is the greatest kingdom of God and tells them that we must be humble ourselves to enter the kingdom, and then talks about God's grace before turning to conflict in the church. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. Jesus said, if another member of the church sins against you, go and point out the fault when the two of you are alone. If the member listens to you, you have regained that one. But if you are not listened to, take one or two others along with you, so that every word may be confirmed by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If the member refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church, and if the offender refuses to listen even to the church, let such a one be as to you, a Gentile and a tax collector. Truly, I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, truly, I tell you, if 2 of you agree on earth about anything you ask, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there among them. Our second reading comes from the 37th chapter of Genesis. After being reunited with his brother Esau, Jacob and his family settled in Bethel, the same place where Jacob had dreamed of God, and Rachel gives birth to Benjamin, the 12th son of Jacob's, before she dies, and the family moves on again, which is where our passage picks up. Jacob settled in the land where his father had lived as an alien, the land of Canaan. This is the story of the family of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. He was the helper to the son of Bilhah and Zippah. His father's wives and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a long robe with sleeves. But his brothers said that his father loved him more, and all of his brothers hated him, and could not speak peacefully to him. Now his brothers went to the pasture, their father's flock near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, are you not brothers pasturing the flock of Shechem? Come, I'll send you to them, he answered. Here I am. So he said to them, go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring them back to me. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to the flock, bringing back word to me. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron. He came to Shechem, and a man found him wandering in the fields. And the man asked him, what are you seeking? I am seeking my brothers, he said. Tell me, please, where are they pasturing the flock? The man said, they have gone far away, for I heard them say, let's go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. Then saw him from a distance, and before he came near to them and conspired to kill him, they said to one another, he has come, this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we shall say that a wild animal has devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. When the Reuben heard he delivered him out of their hands, saying, let us not take his life. Reuben said to them, shed no blood, throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but lay no hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand and restore him to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, and they stripped him of his robe, the long robe with sleeves that he wore, and he took them and threw them in a pit. The pit was empty, there was no water, Then they sat down to eat. Looking up, they saw a caravan of Israelites coming from Galilee, with their camels carrying gum, balm, and resin on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Israelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers agreed. When some Midianites traders passed by, they drew Joseph up, lifting him out of the pit, and they sold him to the Israelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. This is the word for the people of God.
In the book of Numbers and Exodus, we are told that God will punish the sins of the parents to the third, even the fourth generation. And while there are other passages that counteract that, in particular from Deuteronomy, and that Jesus is asked whether man is born blind because of his sins of his parents, and Jesus says, no, we actually can still see that maybe God isn't punishing generation after generation, but the sins of the parents committed keep happening generation after generation. This is true even today. There's been some sociological studies of crime extending across generations of families. In one study in England, it found that 2/3 of all male youths who were convicted came from just 10% of families, and the crime tended to be generational. And while there were many reasons for this, much of it was about expectations and learned behaviors. The same way as you have families with multiple generations of doctors or lawyers or even preachers. We imitate what we see our parents and our grandparents and our family members do. These are learned behaviors that we follow. The same is also true in churches. The churches, too, have their own DNA. And we learn the culture of the church and we follow the same patterns over and over again. One of the first churches I served was more than 100 years old, and you could go back through the records, especially in conflict, and see the same thing occurring, the church dealing with the issues the same way every time they came up. That is, when people had learned the culture of this church, and this is how you do things. But what we also can see is that you can break those patterns. In that particular church, they made a concerted effort to try and deal with conflicts in appropriate ways, and learning how to do that and teaching the congregation, this is what happens when conflict, this is how we deal with it, in order to stop that behavior from continuing generation after generation again. And we can see the same thing as well in families. Linda's father was physically abused by his father, who was more than likely abused by his father, and who knows how many generations back. But the one thing he didn't do was abuse Linda or her sisters. He stopped that pattern of behavior from going forward any more generations. Now, I say all that because in our look at the origin stories of the people who we come call the Israelites, we have seen dysfunction taking place. In fact, we might even wonder whether there's actually any function in these families at all. And now we're moving into the third generation, and we begin to wonder, how long is this going to keep going on? How long are they going to pass these patterns on from generation to generation? Sarah clearly preferred Isaac, her son, over her half-son Ishmael, so much so that she has Abraham cast Ishmael and Hagar out into the wilderness. She doesn't even care whether they live or die in the wilderness. And then Abraham attempts to kill Isaac, and Isaac is so affected by this that we know very little about his life. And then Isaac, we're told, loves Esau more than his son Jacob. But Rebekah loves Jacob more than she loves Esau. And so she plots to have Jacob receive Esau's blessing instead, and then Esau plots to take Jacob's life. There's also a pattern going all the way back in the family to Cain and Abel. Now, I'm sure the family reunions are really fun amongst this group of people. 911 has to be on speed dial for most of them. And so we come to the descendants of Jacob, and we begin to wonder, is anything going to change? Because right at the start, we're told that it appears that Jacob loves Joseph more than any of his other 10 sons. Benjamin's been born, but he's not really part of the picture yet as the 12th son. Joseph is the 11th son born, but he's the first child born to the most beloved wife, Rachel. Because Jacob has 4 wives, Rachel and Leah, who are sisters, and then their servants, who are sort of concubines for Jacob, and they all have bear children except for Rachel. And we're told that because Leah isn't preferred, that God makes her fertile, but it doesn't help in the eyes of Jacob. She's still the preferred, Rachel's still the preferred wife, but she remains without children until she says to Isaac, "Give me a child or I will die." Which harkens back again to what God says to Eve about childbirth, because that's exactly what happened. She gives birth to Joseph, and then she dies, giving birth to Benjamin, the 12th son, who will become the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, it's not really the fact that Jacob loves Joseph more than he loves his other sons. The problem is that he acts out on that belief. And he gives Joseph this amazing Technicolor dream coat, which allows Joseph to rub the fact that he is the preferred son in all of his brothers' faces. And to tell you how convoluted this becomes, Joseph ends up being portrayed by a Mormon who's playing a Jew. It's only in America that could happen. Now, the truth is, the Hebrew actually doesn't say that it's a Technicolor dream coat, or even that it's a coat of many colors. The Hebrew is a little convoluted. We're not sure exactly what it says. And so we get this from the King James Version, which was using the Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, which says a coat of many colors. But regardless of what the coat looks like, it's because of this coat that Joseph's brothers hate him, because he's rubbing the fact that he is the preferred son in all of their faces. And it's not just the coats, it's also that Joseph rats out his brothers, that they are doing something while they're out tending the sheep that they shouldn't be doing. And then in the section that was dropped out of today's reading just for conciseness, he has 2 dreams that the family interprets, meaning that they have to bow down to Joseph, that Joseph is going to be Lord over all of them. If you had a sibling who was doing that, I think you might dislike him too. And in some ways, we're told that Joseph in this story is 17 years old. He sounds sort of like a 17-year-old male. That he thinks that he knows it all, that he's smarter than everyone else in his family, that he's better than everyone else, and he wants them to know it. And so I think we can have some sympathy for the brothers, because Joseph's basically acting like a jerk. But the brothers go off to tend the flocks, and Joseph stays back at the tents just like Jacob did while Esau was out working in the fields. And Jacob calls to him, and Joseph's answer is, we've heard before, "Here I am." That's both a good answer and a bad answer. And so Jacob says, "Go off and find your brothers, and then come back and tell me what's going on. Give me some word of what it is that they're doing. Is this just to make sure that they're safe out there, or is this, again, sort of wanting Joseph to rat them out if they're doing things that they're not supposed to be doing?" It's not quite clear what's happening, but the brothers certainly aren't looking forward to Joseph showing up. And so when the brothers see Joseph coming, wearing his oh-so-special coat, their anger rises, and they plot to kill him. So again, those family patterns replicating themselves over and over again. And we might begin to ask, how long is this going to go on? When are they going to learn their lessons? Jacob should have learned his lesson, let alone Isaac learning the lesson. Yet these patterns keep going over and over. When is someone going to stop this from continuing on generation after generation? So they plot to kill him, but here Joseph gets an unlikely savior. And that's found in the firstborn, his oldest brother, Reuben. Now, we talked about the power of names and the meaning of names and why those are important. And there's different speculation about what Reuben means. One says that it comes from Leah named him, that the name means he has seen my misery. That is, that God has understood that Rachel is the preferred wife, that Leah is the lesser. And so by having this firstborn son, that she will be elevated in Jacob's eyes, and God is rewarding her here. Of course, that doesn't happen. Another interpretation says that Reuben means he will love me. Again, in delivering a son to Jacob, that she will no longer be the lesser wife against Rachel, but that again doesn't happen. So it's a powerful reminder of what favoritism continues to do in this family. And Reuben definitely falls in Jacob's bad side when he ends up having an affair with Bilhah, one of Jacob's concubines. And eventually Jacob will actually give Reuben's birthright to Joseph. And so Reuben, again, has every reason to dislike Joseph as much as his other brothers do. But Reuben, in hearing about this plot, says no. Don't kill Joseph. Let's just put him in a pit, and we'll pretend that he is dead. And his intention is to go back and rescue Joseph from the pit, which doesn't actually happen. But Reuben stands up to his other brothers and says, don't do what it is that you're about to carry out. Now, researchers have done a lot of work on groupthink and how groupthink works and how to break it. One of the studies that was conducted, they put a volunteer in a room of people and they had to solve a math problem. It wasn't a complex math problem, and they were given 4 answers, and they just had to say what answer was the correct one. But what the volunteer didn't know was that everybody else in the room worked for the research project. They were the only ones who were truly volunteering. And so the other group, the other people in the room, all had plotted to come up with, they're going to say what the wrong answer was in order to see what this person would do. And what researchers found out was that the vast majority of the volunteers went along and gave the wrong answer to the math problem as well. And why? Because they didn't want to go against the group. They didn't want to be the one to speak up in opposition to what everyone else was saying. In a follow-up experiment, they found that if just one other person in the room, not another volunteer, again, somebody working on the study, if just one other person gave a different answer, then the volunteer would give the correct answer. That is, even if one other person spoke up in opposition to what the group was saying, it gave the volunteer the freedom and permission to be able to give a different answer. That was true even if the other answer the person gave was the incorrect answer. Now, once the group think was broken, it allowed other people to speak up. So we know that speaking up against a group is hard to do. But again, it just takes one person to speak up to break that group thing. And we know that this is true because if you ask somebody, if I asked somebody to stand up and speak right now, there'd be that long, awkward silence, right? Until somebody finally said, okay, I'm gonna be the first one to do it. But to break groupthink, all it takes is one person to say something different, even if that answer is wrong, for others to be able to feel the freedom to be able to speak themselves. And that's what we see here in Reuben standing up and speaking out and stopping this generational pattern from continuing over and over again. But we know that's not easy. We like to be liked. We like to go along with other people. and all the other things that play a role in not speaking up against people who are saying something we know is wrong. And it's not easy to do. And most of the time that groupthink reigns, it's not life or death situations. It's answering a math question. But if we don't have the freedom or feel the courage to stand up in those situations, we won't be able to do it when it truly is life and death. And think about Reuben. He has every reason to go along with his brothers. Joseph gets his birthrights. He is definitely out of favor, and as a firstborn son, he should be the one who's preferenced, and yet it's Joseph who gets everything. And yet he's the one who stands up to protect his brother. Are we ready or able to stand up and break groupthink? Are we willing to do it even for people we don't like? Now, as I said, Reuben doesn't fully save Joseph because for some reason he goes away and in interim Joseph is sold into slavery in Egypt. It's not quite clear what happens here, whether the brothers are actually the ones who sell him or whether these Midianite traders come along and see him in the pit and pull him out and sell him then off to the Ishmaelites. But it does explain how the family is going to end up in Egypt, which is where we complete this worship series next Sunday. And we don't know what would have happened had Reuben not stood up. Would they have actually killed Joseph? And we don't know because Reuben changes the plans. He does stand up. Sometimes we're afraid to say anything because we want to go along with the crowd. We don't want to be the one to speak up. Sometimes we're afraid, and sometimes that fear is justified. At the memorial service for the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, the opening sentences for that worship service were from today's passage. Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him, and we shall see what becomes of his dreams. What the blood is planned to do to Joseph is what happens to Dr. King. Sometimes speaking up comes with a cost. But we have to ask ourselves, what happens if we don't speak up? How would we answer that question if we were one of the brothers in that story? What would we have done? Would we have been Reuben? Or would we have been one of the other 9? The simple fact is, Reuben changed this story, changes the direction of this family and what's going to happen and where they go, because he was willing to say no, to say stop to his brothers. Even though he was a victim of Joseph's arrogance and immaturity, just as much as his other brothers, and maybe even more so, he changes the story because he says stop. In the story of Esther, Mordecai says, "You can't keep silence at such a time as this." I think that's the story we learn here from Reuben. He can't keep silence in such a time as this. And as we'll see, in doing so, he stops multi-generational dysfunction in his family. And so as we hear stories in the news of atrocities taking place, of racial and tribal hatred, of violence, where we simply see another person being treated cruelly or unkindly, the answer that poses itself to us is, what are we going to do? Are we going to be like Reuben, who says, no, this is not right, stop it? Or are we going to be like the other brothers who went along? Because we're called to something more. We're called to be something more. We're called to be like Reuben. Say, stop. I pray that it'll be so, my brothers and sisters. Amen. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to follow our YouTube channel and Twitter, and like us on Facebook if you haven't already. And remember that every action you take today could change someone's life. So make sure it's a good one and be an agent of love. God bless.